welcome to Sarah's Stamping Retreat. Today we're going to be exploring some different stenciling techniques, and we're going to be doing that with this kit from Indigo Blu that comes in their latest magazine box kit. So the box kit comes with the magazine to tell you how to use all the things. So there's loads of project ideas from different designers, including these cards that I'm going to show you now. So you're basically never going to run out of ideas for what to do with it. Then you get this little die set, so it's got a teeny tiny star, Merry Christmas with some snowflakes, and then some kind of snowflakey starry bits there. You've got this stencil set, which obviously we're going to be using on all our cards today. So it's got some snowflakes, and then some patterns and some stars. We've got this huge stamp set. It's got some really nice kind of like patterns and textures and snowflake. Love this big Noel here. But you've got all sorts on there. Obviously Indigo Blu is quite famous for their mixed media, so it's great for mixed media lovers, but it's also really nice for other cards as well. And then we get this big paper pack as well, so I'll quickly take you through that. And also Indigo Blu have kindly sent me some new to me products that I was able to choose to use for this. So I'm excited to explore those with you. Some of them I didn't even know existed, to be honest, so it'll be fun to have a little look. I think my paper pack is a bit out of sync, so just know that you get 2 of each. I'm going to go through this side because I feel like we've probably missed a couple, because I think some of my pages were in the wrong order. I love these big baubles. You can see these are upside down, but you get some nice kind of sentiments and things. So let's get on and make some cards. So for my first card, we're going to make a circle card. So I've got a 5-inch circle, and I've got some Salty Ocean Distress Oxide ink. So I'm going to cover the circle in that. And I'm not worried about getting a really good blend because we're going to put loads of other kind of textures and things on here. So all I want is kind of just to add a bit of colour. I'm not worried about like a smooth blend or anything like that. And in fact, I think it's probably going to add to the look of our card if it's a bit patchy. So I'm going to leave it like that. And then I've got another piece of card, and I want to use this Noel stamp on here, which is quite big. So I've just made sure that it's big enough to fit that stamp. And then I'm going to cover this with the same ink, but I am going to kind of be a bit more worried about how it looks on this. I kind of want a bit of a smoother look to this one. And really, to get a smoother look, you're just putting on more ink. So you just want to keep topping up your brush a bit more regularly, and also to keep going over any areas that still have a little white showing through. So you can see that looks much smoother compared to that one which we've left kind of patchy. So let's bring this back in. And I'm going to use some of the text and some of these stamps just to add a bit of a really rough pattern over the background. So I'm just going to kind of just stamp over, and I'm not worried about whether it comes out nicely or anything like that. I'm literally just kind of roughly stamping. And again, they might overlap in places. I want more of a texture than being able to read it or see it clearly. You can see I'm not really even thinking about where I'm putting things, I'm just kind of going where it lands. So then we're going to grab our stencil, and we're going to use the snowflakes on this, and we're just going to kind of use it in patches. So I'm going to use the Indigo Blu branded texture paste, but obviously I think a lot of people have texture paste of some sort in their craft rooms anyway, if you're into this kind of thing. I've got a pot that I use every now and then that I've had for years, but Indigo Blu kindly sent me this one, so I'm going to try this one out. And you just kind of put it on like you would a butter knife. I'm just using a palette knife, putting a bit on and then spreading it through. And I'm trying to get kind of a rough pattern, so I'm trying not to go too close to like the edges or anything. Then I'll just set that aside to dry for a little bit. And the important thing to do now is to wash all the things I've used really quickly before that texture paste dries, because it's much easier to wash it off while it's still wet. So then I'm going to bring it back in this piece of blended cardstock. I'm going to use my embossing buddy just to make sure that we've got no kind of sticky bits of ink left on there. So the Distress Oxide does cling to the embossing powder if it's not dry. And then I'm going to add on my Noel. And then I'm going to heat emboss there. So then I'm just going to cut around this. So then I'm going to create my card base. So I've just cut a slither off here and I've scored this about 1/2 inch from the top, and then I'm just going to add a bit of glue above that score line. I'm going to add that on, and then I'm just going to add a bit of foam behind my sentiment, and I'll add that onto there. And then there's our finished card, and it's quite a non-traditional Christmas card. I quite like that. And obviously if you wanted to make it more traditional, you could do it in kind of more traditional colours. So then for my next card, I've got this green card blank, and I'm going to position this roughly in the centre. And I'll just hold this down with a bit of tape. And I'm going to use some gilding flake this time. So I'm going to use this Flitter Glue, which is what Indigo Blu recommend to use with the gilding flakes. So I'm just going to bring in some scrap paper a second. I'm going to use this kind of rounded end blending brush, but Indigo Blu do have special tools on their website for this. I'm thinking that this will probably do. So I'm just going to add some of that into my blending brush, and then I'm going to just pop that through here. So this is literally a glue, so I'm just going to press it through, and they say that this will stay tacky forever, so there's no kind of rush to put your gilding flakes on or anything. Obviously I would imagine that over time you'd get dust on it and stuff and it wouldn't really be that tacky, but I don't think a few minutes is going to harm. So then I've got some of this Chariot of Fire Mega Flake. It's just like quite a bright gold. And I'm going to bring in some scrap paper so I don't lose all my excess flakes. So I'm going to dump some of those on there, and then I'm just going to rub it on. I can see I got some of the glue over the edges of the stencil, so I think what I'll have to do is just kind of cut this middle panel out. So then I'm going to pop these excess flakes back in here, which I'm not going to lie is a bit of a challenge because it's so full. They actually recommend that you keep it in a bigger box so that you don't have to do this, but I don't have one to hand at the moment, so I'm just going to try and squeeze it back in here. I've got a nicely gilded nail as well. So then we're going to want to take off the excess bits. Like sometimes when there's a piece that's across a couple of pieces, you get little excess bits. So I'm just using a blending tool to do that. Again, they do sell proper tools for this, but I don't have them, so I'm just making do with what I've got in my stash. And I'm quite big on that. I think if you're going to be doing this like loads, then obviously you want the proper tools. But if you just do it from time to time like me, I like to make do with what I've got in my stash. And they do have a buffing tool to make that extra shiny as well, but I think that looks really pretty. Obviously I'm going to cut off all this around the outside. So then I'm going to use the same tool to ink up some of the stamps and stamp with them. And as soon as I finish doing this, I'm going to go wash them because we don't want that glue drying on them. So I shouldn't have put away those flakes after all because I need them again for this. So we've got those nice glossy stamped images. So then I'm just going to cut these out. So then I've got this sentiment from the pack here, and I'm just going to cut around it because I don't want that border on it. Now I'm obviously going with this with love sentiment, so it could be kind of for any time. You could use obviously whatever sentiment you want to fit with what you want it to be, because I don't think that this one is necessarily a Christmas card. So I ended up changing my mind a little bit about this, because once I'd cut this down I thought it'd be nice to have a contrast in the background. So I'm using this kind of pinky purple colour. So I've cut this down, and then I've cut a gold piece of cardstock 1/8 of an inch bigger, and then I've got a sentiment that I cut from the pack, but I decided to change this to a pink background, so I've cut some more of those on a pink background because they stand out off this green more nicely. So I'm going to lay it out like that. So let's stick it all together. So then I'm going to add this panel onto my card on foam. And this foam's really cool for this kind of thing because it's one-sided sticky, so you get a really good adhesion to that gold, but then I can add glue on this side and have a bit of wiggle room when I'm adding it to my card, so that if I don't get it in exactly the right place at first, then I can wiggle it a little bit. Whereas the ones that are double-sided sticky, once you've stuck it down, it's kind of stuck and you're going to wreck your paper if you pull it up. So I'm going to add all my extra bits on foam as well. And then I've got some of these gold gems, these are from Spellbinders. I'm just going to add those to the centre of those stars. And then there's that card finished. So then for my next card, I'm going to grab a block, and then I'm going to put on some texture paste. And then this time I'm going to add some colour. So I'm going to use this Eco Vivid Much Miller ink. And it comes with a pipette, so I can just squeeze on a couple of drops. And I would suggest just using a couple of drops at first, and then if you need some more, add some more afterwards. Because you don't want to add too much and make your paste too runny. So for me that's not vivid enough, so I'm going to add another couple of drops. And maybe I'll just go a little darker again. I'm just adding one that time, so I've added 5 drops overall. Obviously it will depend on how much texture paste you've got out and stuff like that. So now I want to use this panel here, and I'm going to cut it out so I don't need to worry too much. But I'm just going to add some of this paste through there. And then I can just lift that up and you can see how pretty that looks. Okay, so I've cut that panel down, and then I'm just going to put marks on each side of it. And that's because I want some stamping to come out from underneath there. So I'm going to heat emboss this pattern along each of those lines that I've put in there. I'm going to heat emboss that in clear embossing powder. So then I'm going to grab my Seedless Preserves Distress Oxide ink, and I'm just going to add that over that heat embossing to get that emboss resist look. You can see that pattern really showing through now. And obviously the middle is going to be covered by that panel that we created, so I'm not worried about that. So then I quite like this sentiment, but I don't want it to be too Christmassy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to heat emboss it on here, and then I'm going to cut off these bits so it just says count your blessings, embrace the joy, instead of count your blessings and embrace the joy of the season. So now I'm just going to cut around this. So I'm going to add some foam behind this. You can see I'm just using some waste from some round foam pads for this. And I'm going to add that onto there. So that's really pretty. So then for this next card, I'm going to use some of this gilding gum. I've never used this before, and the idea is that you put half this and half of whichever colour of Luscious pigment powder you like. So there are loads of colours available. I've got Juicy Plum, Grungy Gold and this Penny Dreadful, but I'm going to use the Penny Dreadful. So it says that you want about equal parts of the gum and the powder. So let's see how that mixes up. And I'm just mixing it up in an old embossing powder pot, but just kind of whatever pot you've got. The idea is that it will make like a gilding paste, a gilding wax. You can see that's really got a lot of shine to it, and the powder kind of makes it thicker as well. So just consider what consistency you want when you're putting that in as well. I think this has actually turned out pretty well. And I've put it in a pot because you can use it again. So I want to add a little panel of this down my card. So I've got a 5 by 5 inch green card blank. And I think I might just add it with my finger because that's what I'd do with normal gilding wax. Like I said, I've never used this before, so we'll see how it goes. The only problem with that is it's not getting into all the corners. So what I might do is add a bit more of the gilding gum so that it's a bit looser. And you have to excuse my hands because I'm getting this everywhere. And maybe I'll try kind of adding it with a paintbrush. I'm just kind of playing here really to see what works best because obviously I've never used it before. So I'm playing with the consistency and I'm playing with the best ways to put it on. Let's see what that looks like. Actually, that looks quite nice. I'm just going to layer this down and do a bit more once that's a bit drier. Actually, I've just switched to a small blending brush and that appears to be working even better. So maybe that's the way to go. Yeah, that looks like a bit of a cleaner finish too. So I'm going to add some more up here. So I really like how this has come out. It's really shiny. And like you saw, we only used a little bit of this gilding gum. So you can make whatever colour paste that you've got this Luscious pigment powder for. So I actually really like that. And by the way, there are so many different ways you can use this to like colour things, to use it on its own. Like there's lots of different ways to use that. So it's not just for with the gum. So I'm going to use this joy stamp. I'm just going to heat emboss that onto some green cardstock. I'm going to heat emboss it in copper to go with our gilding. And I'm just going to cut that out. And then I've also got some of these baubles that I've cut from the pack that I want to add down here. So let's add those on with some foam pads. And then I'll add some more behind the joy. And I'll add that onto there. I'm going to trim off the excess. And then I've just got 2 small strips of copper cardstock. And I'm just going to glue those onto here. And then that's that card then. So then for my final card, we're going to make a diamond pop-up card. And I've got this blue piece of cardstock that measures 10 by 5 inches. And I'm going to score that at 5 inches, 2.5 inches. And then I'm going to put a little mark at 7.5 inches. And I'm going to turn this round. I'm going to mark at 2.5 inches. I'm going to turn around and I'm going to mark at 2.5 inches again. So then off screen, I'm just going to cut from this mark that we made to this one and from this one to this one to get a pointy top to that. So then you might have noticed that I've drawn a line down the middle of my scoreboard, and I use that so that I can line up bits that I want to score. So I want to line up this point on this corner with that bottom score line diagonally, and then again the other way, so that bottom score line with this corner this time. So then I can just fold those over, and then I'm going to push this in and pop the diamond out, and then I'll just fold that under. So then I've cut a piece that's 1/8 of an inch smaller than here, so that is 3 3/8 inches square, and then the same for the bottom, so that is 4 7/8 inches by 2 3/8 inches. And then all I'm going to do is just do some normal ink blending on this bottom bit here. So I'm going to use the Seedless Preserves, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it until I'm about halfway over, because halfway is the best place for the seam in it, because we're going to cover that up. And then I'm going to move this across and I add it over again, and I'm going to stencil again. And I kind of wish I'd used my sticky mat for this, but never mind. And you can see we've got this bit in the middle that's not quite right. It's okay because that's going to get covered up. So that's going to go on this bottom piece here, and then this is going to come down over the top of there. And while we've got that ink out, I'm going to take a square. So I'm going to take this huge stamp. It's actually bigger than my block, but I'm only going to use a section of it, so that's fine. And I'm just inking it up with that same Seedless Preserves ink. And then I'm going to stamp it onto here. And then I'm going to use that same ink that we used earlier. I'm just going to splash it onto here, directly from the pipette. I've actually just cut these down to 4 3/4 by 2 1/4 and 3 1/4 inches square, and then I want to just come in from the sides on this so that we get the purple edges. So I'm going to grab some of this pink cardstock that we used earlier, and I'm just going to heat emboss these onto it. So I've cut those out, so let's start putting this together. So I'm going to glue this onto here, and then I'm going to glue under this triangle bit, and I'm going to glue that onto here. Then I'm going to glue this panel onto the top. Then I'm going to add these two onto here like this. I'm going to add those on with foam pads. So I'm going to add this one here. And then I've got this happy birthday sentiment that I cut from the pack, and I'm going to add that on with a foam strip. And then I'm going to add my sentiment along here. There's that final card finished. Then there are all 5 of today's cards. We've got a couple of Christmas cards and a few other cards. And I've used lots of different techniques and products in this video, but you could just use what you've got on hand. So for example, where I've used the gilding flakes on this one, you get a similar look by heat embossing instead. Or you could put just normal ink through the stencil for this one. Obviously you wouldn't get the dimension then, it would look a little different, but you can get a similar look. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's video. I'd love to know which is your favourite. Please do let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's video, I'd really appreciate you clicking like below. You can also press subscribe if you'd like to see future videos. If you press the bell button and select all, then YouTube will also notify you when I've got a new video available. All of the products that I've used for today's cards are listed in the description below. And there's also a link there to my blog where you can find a picture supply list if that helps you find what you're looking for. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope to see you again soon.